Well, good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see all of you. It's so great we're able to have a film, television, digital media board meeting today. This will be streamed on YouTube, and it is being broadcast live on YouTube. And it is being assisted by the Able City Clerks Division, who have now done a number of these. So they'll be helping us all out. I hope you've all been staying safe, you and your families, through this terrible time. And we'll talk about a number of things today, including some good news announcements later on in the meeting. Good morning, Warren, you're on. Great to see you. So good morning, I'm City Councillor Paula Fletcher. I'm the chair of the Film, Television, Digital Media Advisory Board, along with my co-chair, Jonathan Ahi, with the great haircut. And the clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'm now calling meeting 5 of the Film, Television, and Digital Media Advisory Board to order, and welcome everyone to this special meeting of the board. The meeting is being held under the city's WebEx technology, with members of staff connecting by video conference or calling in. So our staff from the film office are all here with us virtually. City Council has amended our meeting rules to allow us to hold virtual meetings during the COVID-19 emergency. Once the emergency is over, we will return to holding our meetings in person in accordance with the advice from the Medical Officer of Health, who's been doing an able job on all of our behalfs through the pandemic. Because we are meeting remotely, we're asking for your patience with any delays, technology, or technological issues or technical issues. You all know about those, being from the industry. We don't have any registered public speakers today, and members of the public are able to watch on YouTube. Members, this is a special meeting of the Film, Television, and Digital Media Advisory Board. We may only consider the business that's on the agenda and no other business. I would also ask members to please email any motions on any of the agenda items to the board administrator at ftdmb@toronto.ca. Text Jonathan if you don't remember that. He'll get that sent right back out to you. I'd like to request that all staff keep their video turned off when they are not speaking or answering questions. This will make it easier for me to chair and for those watching on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate. There's only 25 slots, or during votes. I also ask all members and staff to keep their microphones muted unless you need to answer or ask a question or speak. If members wish to ask questions of staff or to speak, please make sure your video is on and raise your hands or unmute your mic and indicate your intention to speak, and I will create a speakers list. When voting, I ask that members make sure your video is turned on and raise your hands, or we'll do thumbs up, thumbs down to vote today. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely, the board would like to acknowledge that the land that we're on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm going to ask if there's any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. If you do, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and say so. Okay, seeing none, let's proceed with the first item. You understand that we have, first item is film industry mitigation and recovery strategies. And within this, the city has set up a special committee, and our very own Marguerite is very high-level position there, Marguerite, in this committee on all the economic development issues and how also to bring people together as we're coming out of the pandemic. So today we have invited Saad Rafi, who has agreed to take on this task for recovery and restarting recovery and reimagining how the city is going to work. So because this is a very important industry, one of the big three, we always say, food, finance, and film, it's extremely important that it get back up and running as quickly as possible. So the way we will proceed this morning is I'm going to ask Mr. Saad Rafi, who's here with us in the committee room too, to just tell us a little bit about his role and what he would like to hear from the film industry, and then all of you to be able to help him, and as well Marguerite, who's doing a great job on our behalf, and thank you, Marguerite, for all you're doing, to lay out some of the major issues to have a smooth restart for our industry here in Toronto when that happens. Okay? Is that okay with everybody? If so, I'm going to call on you, Mr. Saad Rafi, and hopefully, I think everything's working here, yes, for you to be on camera. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. It's a pleasure to be Great. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with all of you, virtually in most cases. The Office of Recovery and Rebuild was started in late April, so we're a very sort of new organization. And we have set about to do many different things, but I'll get to that in a moment. I just wanted to pick up on the councillor's comment of the big three in terms of the film, television, and digital media industry. I think we have a very keen understanding of the impact that you have on this economy, the jobs, the creative aspects that you bring to the city and the region and the country, for that matter. So please know that we are definitely alive to the need to, in a public health guided, orderly way, to ensure that you're able to get back up and running as soon as possible. In addition to that, I'm hoping you would have received an invitation by now to a consultation, and I'll get into what we're doing in our consultations in a moment. If you haven't, please reach out to Marguerite and she'll ensure that that is rectified. And as the councillors mentioned, speaking of Marguerite, Marguerite was nominated by the senior leadership team of the city to be a theme lead in the Office of Recovery and Rebuild, and I'm pleased that she agreed to take that on. She's taking on the two themes. One is the business and culture industries, and the second is something that we're calling for now because we want a respectful and appropriate moniker for this, but Inspire Toronto. So, that would be about working with many different industries to help get people back into the, and out of the mode of restrictions and into buying local, shopping local, eating local, etc. And we'll have more to say about that in the ensuing weeks, excuse me. So needless to say, you have a very strong champion for all of you right in the Office of Recovery and Rebuild, who's obviously very knowledgeable and very passionate about your industries. So I'm really pleased that Marguerite's taken this on. So the clerk's office, thanks for your patience. We can bring up the slide deck. Thank you very much. And I'll go right to slide 2, please, when it comes up. Thank you. Thank you very much. So obviously, public health remains our primary driving force or set of directions. The restart and recovery of this city and of the region will have to follow necessary public health conditions. I think we all have come to expect that, and we have all realized that we are under wonderful leadership and guidance from our Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Eileen Davila. So, unfortunately, there is no set date for when various activities can transition back from one phase to the next. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about phase 2 and 3 in the open dialogue period. This virus is dictating the timeline, and it seems to be somewhat stubborn in this region, given the densities that we have. And the recovery and rebuild efforts will continue until all systems return to normal, and our preference would be better. And we have had the benefit of hearing from the city's partners, its residents, its businesses, and of course we'll continue to reach out to them, because you're all going to be playing a huge role in making sure that the restoration of the numerous communities that Toronto is made up of is done in a way that supports with the proper infrastructure and people feel safe and equipped to be out and about. And of course, given the fact that we have so many communities in the city, there will be a unique experience for each of them, and we are trying to ensure that we can reignite that passion for our communities through the recovery process. Maybe we move to the next slide, please. So with that context, the objectives for our office is to coordinate a citywide approach, again, informed by public health evidence and evidence-informed best practices, to develop recovery strategies and actions for the city. And we're going to do that by engaging a broad cross-section of stakeholders, residents, Indigenous communities, businesses, cultural communities, council members, etc. And that consultation process kicked off last Friday. We launched a website. You can access that at toronto.ca/recovery-rebuild. And we have a survey there. We have 7 themes, which I'll get to in a minute, and we are doing broad engagement and consultation on those 7 themes. And of course, we have the benefit and the luxury of having many, many subject matter experts with operational and service expertise in the city who are supporting the likes of Marguerite and her theme lead colleagues. Next slide, please. So my mandate is really quite simple. Prepare a report with actionable recommendations that can be implemented by the city and its agencies that will assist communities, businesses, partners, and institutions to deal with the recovery, the rebuild, and help the city with reimagining how it provides services to its citizens in a completely different way in many cases. One of the ways to do this, I mentioned, we will do it through engagement. And that broad engagement has happened. Started. We're asking people to go to the website, fill in the survey if they have an opportunity to do so by the end of June. We will be doing virtual consultation sessions throughout June. We anticipate using existing tables, creating our own tables, especially for cultural industries. And there will be some, I would say, in excess of a couple of hundred different tables with thousands of participants. Next slide, please. So this work will culminate in a report through the city manager to city council on or about the September council meeting. That is our ambition. I think for us to take any longer than that would impair the recommendations, such that, you know, while we have felt the sort of slow aspects of being in isolation for the last many weeks, I also get a feeling that things are going to start to accelerate fairly quickly over the course of the summer, and so we want to make sure we can be flexible and keep pace with that. So we will look at various elements, but our recommendations likely will really start to address the city's relationship with other levels of government. There are many cost-shared programs. There's a limited revenue-raising opportunity or ability for the city. We need to look at partnerships to how to address long-term needs of the City of Toronto. We need to identify where there may be alliances, and also look at how we deliver programs and services in a very different way. Of course, digitizing services is an obvious and necessary one off the top. So let's move to the next slide, please, because I want to leave time for a good discussion. So the office itself is meant to be time limited. We will file a report in September. There may be some residual activities after that may be required, but the report will be in the hands of council and city leadership to undertake implementation in an orderly and planned manner. We will continue to work with the city leadership and what's called the corporate leadership team. So the senior leadership is the deputy city managers. Corporate leadership are the directors and the executive directors and general managers. Throughout this process, we have started reaching out to councillors, the co-chairs especially of the mayor's task force tables, and we will report back into them and talk to them about our feedback after consultations are concluded. And then, of course, all of that will be put into the final report that I'm referring to, submitted to the city manager and through him to council. Of course, it will be widely available. All the data and the findings will be available as well on the city's website. Next slide, please. I think these re-words have been used in differing fashions in differing governments at differing levels of government. We've adopted the application of the following three terms. We're in the restart, reopen phase. This is something that is the regulatory responsibility and purview of the province of Ontario under their emergency legislation. So, you know, we're trying to keep pace when they announce the next stage and trying to make sure that the city services that are affected are stood up and able to be used, whether that's parks, whether that's in the future splash pads, pools, or restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. And then secondly, that gets us into the recovery phase. We've already started to hear from businesses and organizations, community groups, on what they need to effectively recover from what has been a long absence of being able to interact with people, being able to be in a market where they have customers, where they have community members coming to avail themselves of their services. And then the medium to longer term would be looking at how the economy, how the city, how community organizations, vulnerable populations have to rebuild, because we know that many of those populations have had their situations exacerbated through this pandemic. And then there's a reimagine phase. And the reimagine phase may be with businesses and cultural organizations. It will definitely be something the city is examining itself in terms of its long-term approach to its citizens and the services it provides. Next slide, please. I only have two left, and I will try to get through them very quickly. On the left of this slide, slide 8, you will see the 7 themes, and then you'll see the individuals that are leading those themes. And you know, I think that nomenclature for these things sometimes is challenging because it doesn't necessarily describe what it is that will be examined. You might see strategic alliances as one of those things. That would include partnerships. That would include how to leverage and have a better working relationship with other organizations and how they can help in the recovery and rebuild process, just by one example. Next slide, please. And then last, this is really how our recommendations will be developed. We have started with looking at interjurisdictional information, intelligence, and how other cities, other jurisdictions, states, and federal jurisdictions are restarting, because I think we all know that globally the trajectory of restart and reopening is very different depending on where you are in the world. And then we're in the engage aspect of this. Over the course of the summer, we will be analyzing the findings, developing options, and then early fall, September, we will be in a position of providing a recommendation. So that's a relatively quick run through of what we've started doing in 5 short weeks. And hopefully that will spur some questions and some dialogue. So I will stop there, and Councillor, back to you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. We really appreciate that. And I just want to give a shout out. I missed Councillor Jennifer McKelvey there when I did the roll call for attendance. Welcome, Councillor McKelvey. It's always good to see you. Thank you for that. And Marguerite, did you want to say anything on top of that, given that you're in that office, or would you like us to just jump into some of the issues that members would like to flag for SUD and for you, if they haven't already, on what a smooth opening, concerns about the opening, and advice to make it smoother. Did you want to just say anything before we start?
I think Saad covered everything off really well, and selfishly, if I may say so, I think we'd all be served by hearing more from the membership of the board than from me. Magali and Bobby and I are all here. We've been working on the reopening, and so I think it's good for us to hear questions or concerns, and it's certainly good for Saad to hear them as well. So I will defer to the board, if I may.
You may. Just thought I'd give you that opportunity. So I'm just going to open that up for board members now for the any questions, concerns, things you want to highlight, things you're really worried about as we start moving back into a reopened phase.
Councillor Fletcher, it's
yes,
Nisha. I was just curious. I was actually very concerned about the timeliness of the report, given that we're going into summer mode. And as I do a walkabout in the beaches area where I live, I see everyone out and about enjoying the great weather. And at the sidewalk, everyone's bumping into each other. So I was just wondering, is there a short-term report or focus on what to do over the summer to sort of mitigate, the pandemic?
Well, yes, I would thank you for that. I would perhaps maybe just draw a little bit of a distinction in that you will continue to hear from Dr. Davila on the public health implications, and I'm not just trying to narrowly respond to your point, because I think we're going to be living with various levels of cases, unfortunately, and I think the idea here is to have a very measured return to sort of, I'll just say generically, business, so that we don't create a second wave or future community spread. So, the work of Toronto Public Health will continue to be at the same pace until likely after a vaccine has been found. And so it's up to the province to determine, when they lift the ultimate emergency. But I think continual advice on how to, practice physical distancing and the other public health requirements will be there. In addition, there will be some reference to occupational health advice, because we're hearing from many companies and organizations that, the line between those two, public and occupational health, is a very fine one, and they need assistance with both. So the last thing I'd say is we are contemplating thinking about maybe an interim kind of report, but as you all know, it's difficult to not go too fast, but yet not be so slow to find out that your recommendations have become somewhat obsolete. So we will constantly keep that on the front burner for us to consider.
Thank you. I was thinking in terms of the sidewalk, just to have traffic in one direction instead of incoming both sides. That could help to reduce and maintain distancing if the traffic flows in one direction. Simple things like that could be implemented that I think the general public would follow.
Sure. So a little bit outside of my remit, but we can certainly pass it along to public health for sure. For sure. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that, first of all, if you want to speak, you can text me or you can text Jonathan, or you can send that in to what we said earlier, email it to ftdmb@toronto.ca, or you can put your hand up. I don't have a full screen. I can't see everything. Jonathan has his hand up. Does anybody else, shall I make a speakers list? Anyone else have issues they want to draw to Samantha? Thank you. Anybody else, or you'll wait for Cynthia? David? Looking. Okay, we'll start there. Thank you. It's just going to take your picture board. There we go. Okay, Jonathan, Thank you.
Todd and Marguerite, thank you, one, for holding these positions and looking after it, and your commitment to the film industry. It's really appreciated. Todd, I understand that obviously any restrictions that have to come in place with regard to secondary outbreaks or even localized outbreaks or a resurgence in the numbers will be totally driven from a medical standpoint of what's required. But obviously any secondary shutdowns or even a localized outbreak that would require restrictions in our industry could have very negative and devastating impacts to business owners or even individuals coming to who have used significant capital to obviously get to that return. What are the ways that people from the industry, people around this table, our business owners can get information to you about the impacts that those decisions might have on their businesses? So only the most critical restrictions that are required from a medical standpoint have to be enacted, and they're informed by the potential impacts on those businesses.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think there's a couple of ways. First and foremost will be through the consultation that we're engaging in. We're trying to break up the consultation. There's a discussion guide available, but that's effectively a prop to generate discussion and conversation. People tend to not need that. But we want to segment this between recovery and rebuild, and I think some of the points you just made would be the immediate impacts of recovery. And I guess the other thing I would say is we're hearing from sort of the intelligence that we're picking up from the province that they may do what they did with other sectors and use the industry's own standards, both from a public health but also an occupational health point of view, and point to those standards to allow production to rebegin. And to restart. I can't tell you exactly whether that will be for major productions, smaller productions, and the timing, but it could be imminent actually for certainly smaller productions with industry sort of standards used and applied, which I hope would be seen to be beneficial by yourself and your colleagues.
Jonathan, is that answer, or you got anything more?
That is a component, absolutely. I just want to make sure that obviously we have those guidelines, and a lot of people around the table who are involved in the crafting of those, and there's going to be a report on them later. I just want to make sure that we are able to get information quickly to those that need it for when they're considering potential measures that need to be reenacted or reimposed, about what the potential negative impacts would be on the businesses for those, and where only what's absolutely required is being imposed. Obviously, that's a request and not a demand, but I want to make sure there's a flow of information and how quickly we are able to get that to who needs to know it. And so obviously your department, we can go through Marguerite to you, and you obviously can't be involved in the decisions the province make, but you can have input, I presume. So we want to make sure we're able to get that information to you, and I think I appreciate your consideration of that.
I can certainly tell you that I have taken off my proverbial shoe and pounded the table often with the province to say that we do need lead time. We can't have 24 hours notice and an effective date 24 hours after that. I think that other industries beyond your own have also made these comments, and so I'm hopeful that with the stage 2 opening sounding like it's coming very, very soon, I would say very, very soon, that they heed that advice and those warnings. Even several days would be better than a shorter time frame. One, the second thing is, the challenge is always, as we all know, finding where that proverbial fulcrum is between sound public health guidance and just practical, let's not go over the top with requirements that perhaps are unnecessary and overkill. And so I understand your comments and respect them, and at every opportunity we have, we will pass them along for sure.
Appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Then Samantha.
This may have been partially addressed already. I'm not sure if there's more that you can tell us about timing. It sounded like, the report that you're doing isn't going to be published until the fall. I don't know that this industry can wait until the fall to reopen, but I just heard you say there may be a sooner reopening, at least for smaller productions. So is there more that you can tell us about the timeline for reopening productions and, what's being contemplated there? Because I think we've been holding our breaths for a long time. I think the beauty of our industry is that, we're really good with protocols and rules, and people work together, as a family on our sets, being very conscious of one another. And, you've got to be in this place at this time, and you need to stand over there, and I'll stand over here. So I think we're actually, there's a great opportunity for us to go back to work, because we're used to sort of marshaling the troops in a way that, Home Depot's probably not used to doing when it comes to their customers and even their staff. So is there more that you can tell us about timing?
Yes, and first, by the way, I completely understand the point you're making in terms of marshaling the resources on a set or in a live location, etc. But I also understand that it's an international business, and so the movement of talent is an issue as well. As I mentioned, the province will pull the trigger on the next stage of reopening. They're at stage 2. They have 3 stages that they've identified. There may be one other, which would be post-vaccine. We're hearing that in the next several days, they'll likely come out with an announcement of several industries or sectors, businesses, being reopened with some conditions. And in my various discussions, your industries have been mused by them about this. I don't know where they're going to land, to be perfectly honest, in the sense of what size of production. But I have heard that they will, as I mentioned to Jonathan in my last response, that they will use industry standards, which I would imagine is of some benefit. So we are, at the behest of the province in this regard, as are you, or like you are.
Samantha, does that suffice? That
As much as anything can suffice these days. Yes, thank you very much.
Fair enough.
Yes, and the protocols, I'm sure we'll get into that later under some of the other issues, but kind of the protocols you're discussing and how those are being developed for actual work sites in the film industry. Cynthia, where are you? There you are.
Thank you, Councillor. And thank you for this presentation and all of the work that's gone into it. I just have some questions of clarification on what you were talking about cost sharing of programs and revenue auction and actionable recommendations. So do you have any restrictions or guidelines or instructions given to you around like whether or not there could be new investments in the industry, whether there may be seeking to be permit fees collected, sort of asking about can we ask for investments and will you be looking, I know the city is horribly cash strapped by this situation, so will there be effective maintenance of existing programs as we start to open up?
Yes, thank you for your question. And you reminded me that I didn't properly answer the previous question. I think it was a related aspect to it. So I'll try to cover both off, and hopefully they'll give a little bit better relief to the previous questioner. So while we are going to table a report in September, I shouldn't have left you with an impression that means that if there are necessary initiatives, the example you just mentioned, Cynthia, about perhaps permits, et cetera, that are needed for restart and or recovery, that does not, our timetable does not prevent the city with discussions with us based on input at consultation sessions, for example, from putting in other measures that might help, be they financial, be they regulatory, be they what bylaw related, what have you. You're right, the city is not in a strong financial position, but we also don't want to discourage any kind of request, ask. In fact, regardless of what level of government's responsibility it may fall under, because the need to know these things and to be able to advocate on your behalf with other senior levels of government is also necessary. So I can't spend the city's money, but I can certainly try and make recommendations such that where there are abilities to defer, forego, appeal to other levels of government. So this will be a constant process between now and when we finish the report. It isn't something that has to wait till the end of the report, and I regret leaving you with that impression.
Cynthia,
Thank you.
does that answer your question? Good? Or are you? Yes?
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. David Hardy, where are you? There you are.
Right here. Thank you. The Toronto Maple Leafs hat team. Thanks, Councillor, and thank you, Saad and Marguerite, very much for this. Mike, it's not so much a question, but just a comment and kind of concern that I'd like to table. And it perhaps is not part of the purview of your report and your work, but at the best of times in the past, there's a challenge in interagency, interdepartment collaboration in the film industry. We work very hard to try and break down silos, but they exist, and they rear up from time to time in the best of times. Coming out of this, everybody will have pulled their knees so tightly to their chest that I fear that without very strong recommendation, requirements, input, that departments will be looking after their own interests, which obviously they should, but the sense of collaboration, it will be very, very much challenged. And I would hope that there could be some encouragement, or I guess it's probably all, the departments look at a holistic approaches and not just a department by department, agency by agency. This is a little bit vague, but I just think of permitting, the permitting office and development. We fight hard to ensure that development is always has got a film lens attached to it. Transportation services the same. It's a constant running battle, and I'm sure Marguerite and Magali and Bobby would to some degree concur. So that's my concern, and I hope that it can be addressed in that sense of collaboration and cooperation between departments be really at the forefront. A certainty will be hard to come by, but essential coming out of this, because there could very well be a fairly quick ramp up.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's a very fair point to put on our table, as it were, and I'll do my best to answer it in spite of the fact that I'm a Habs fan. Just kidding about that. I'm not kidding about being a Habs fan, but that doesn't impair my ability to answer your question. I would really encourage all of you to ensure that you put issues like this and others during the consultations. Because one thing I can tell you at the outset is Chris Murray, the city manager here, he has absolutely no interest in maintaining the status quo. He has sort of freed his own approach and that of his leadership team, and he's certainly encouraged me to say that nothing is off the table or everything is on the table. And when it comes to the city having to reimagine its services, I can imagine some of you might be sitting there listening to that and saying, oh yeah, you might as well have said, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. But I believe that to be a sincere desire, and I have seen lots of let's call it more effective collaboration in trying to, at speed and with haste, get city services up and running to keep pace with the province's reopening. So it's a very important issue for sure, and it's something that is already coming out in other fora as well. So thank you for that.
Yes, we want to be right up on top of your radar, Saj.
Councillor, I don't know you well, but I've learned that already, that you will ensure that.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has been inspired by this discussion, or we haven't touched your main issue, or that you'd like to advise on while you have this chance? Any more hands? Any more thoughts? I think everybody is going to one of the consultations, but it's a good start in that way. So thank you very much. And did we want to have a discussion on this, or are you happy to just receive this item now? What's your wish, members? That was questions. Any discussion? Jonathan? Should we just proceed with receiving the report?
Motion to receive.
There is one little motion that City Council requests the Chief Recovery and Rebuild Officer, in consultation with the Film Commissioner and Director of Entertainment Industries, that'd be you, Marguerite, and other appropriate city staff to take into consideration the Film, Television, and Digital Media Advisory Board's concerns and suggestions on mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 in preparation for the recovery. So everything that was put forward today and suggestions and concerns, formally be passing them over to Sod with that motion. Jonathan, I'm going to assume you're moving that. Can I have a show of hands, all in favor, please, or a thumbs up? Everybody in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Nobody. Thanks so much, and thank you very much. We won't keep you much longer. You're very busy fixing everything, getting ready.
I would just like to thank you, Councillor, and the board for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today, but just to emphasize what you've said, Councillor, that this is the beginning of that dialogue, and please do ensure that you can participate in our consultation, and we look forward to your feedback.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Do we receive that? Oh, the item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item FB 5.2, Infrastructure and Capacity Building Updates. And I'm going to turn this over to my co-chair, Jonathan Ahi, to lead this. And I understand that a number of people are involved in different ways, so we'll just do a very quick overview and then ask any questions of staff, or have Marguerite, Magali, or Bobby jump into this discussion conversation. Okay, Jonathan.
Sorry, Councillor, one other thing, just under the previous one, were we going to do the Jim Rokopoulos for his advisory panel? And
sorry, I can't hear you. Couldn't hear you there. Repeat.
Sorry, I'll speak up. Were we under the previous item, under FB 5.1, are we not doing the update of the guidelines from section 21?
No, I didn't have that on here. Okay. Would you rather do that there?
Can I do it under here as well?
Yep.
I thought we were going to start with the advice. Okay, thank you.
Yes, no problem. So, we'll do that under FB 5.2, the guidelines. No problem. Yep.
I'd like to start with that. So just everyone on the committee, I think we should start with, there's a number of provincial committees that have been struck to help deal with the COVID-19 response and to get information as well as consideration before the province, who ultimately is making most of those decisions, as Sad pointed out earlier. From that, we didn't feel it was wise or worthy of your time to replicate those committees at the city level. So I think it would be good for us to have a quick report from individuals around this table who sit as both members of this committee and are working diligently at the provincial level to ensure that the industry's issues and responses are put forward at the provincial level. So to that end, I'd like to start first with Jason, Mosigan, Warren, for either of you, whoever wants to start, give a brief report on the Section 21 guidelines that will be governing Ontario with respect to recommendations for the restart for the film industry, specific to COVID guidelines. So, and then after that, Jim, I'll come to you just to talk about your appointment as the advisory panel chair with Christine. So Jason or Monty, or Warren.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of kind of how what we've done, and Jason will turn it over to next steps. So just briefly, for those who aren't aware, the Section 21 committee is an advisory committee to the Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development. It's co-chaired by NABET, by Jason Mosick for NABET, and by Sean Porter for the CMPA. and it historically has drafted health and safety guidelines that are used by the industry, by the film and television industry. Once COVID struck our industry and the world, Section 21 sprung into action, and I got together, put together COVID-specific health and safety guidelines that can be used on production once we get up and running. So we struck a subcommittee, and this is made up of the unions and guilds, the CMPA, a series of producers, the City of Toronto, Ontario Create, Ontario, William F. White, Hollywood Studios, and a number of other stakeholders, as well as the Ministry of Labor, Training and Skills Development. The guidelines are intended for use by productions of all sizes and all genres, so they need to be naturally scalable and customizable. The Section 21 committee, as an advisory committee to a government ministry, it's mandated to make recommendations. It doesn't have the power, obviously, to prescribe specific actions, and so the guidelines are just that, they're guidelines. But the purpose is to allow employers to draft policies and procedures for use on their specific productions that accord with the guidelines and the recommendations within it. So not everything in the guidelines document might apply to every single show or to every single production, but you're going to be able to draft rigorous and comprehensive policies that provide for safe work environments once we return to work, if you're following those guidelines. The structure of the guidelines is fairly straightforward. We wanted to make it as intuitive as possible. We have a general guideline that concerns matters that are applicable to the entirety of the workplace and to all workplace parties. So that would be, pre-work screening processes, personal hygiene practices, physical distancing, cleaning, the use of personal protective equipment and things like that. And then we have a series of department or topic-specific guidelines, such as guidelines for specific considerations relating to camera, construction, to hair, makeup, and wardrobe departments, locations, studios, to performers, technicians, etc. The basic structure of each of the topic or department-specific guidelines does tend to follow a fairly similar structure. There will be a review of specific physical distancing considerations that are related to that department in particular. Any specific concerns related to a department on the sharing and use of equipment for that department, the specific uses of PPE that should be considered for those departments, cleaning considerations, and anything else that's just that's particular to a given area of production. Jason can speak to where we go now that we have the guidelines document that's drafted by the committee.
Thanks, Warren. So the guidelines have now been adopted by both the subcommittee that was struck to formulate them over the course of essentially the month of May. They have now also been endorsed by the Section 21 committee writ large, and as of yesterday have been submitted to the Minister of Labor, Labor, Training, Skills Development, as well as the Minister of Heritage, Tourism, Sport and Culture for their review and likely endorsement. I think the one benefit that Ontario has over other jurisdictions is the safety guidelines that we come up with that govern the industry are actually also endorsed by the provincial government, hosted on the provincial government's website, which I think is a big selling feature and endorsement to what the industry comes up with in terms of these best practices documents. So we are hopeful that the turnaround is going to be relatively quick. Our Ministry of Labor, Training and Skills Development representative on our Section 21 committee was very helpful in terms of actually sharing initial drafts or earlier drafts with those at the ministry that needed to see it. So even right away or immediately have already been reviewed by physicians at the province, as well as infectious disease control consultants. So now there's a couple more layers that it needs to go through at the ministry, and hopefully we'll be able to roll it out to the public.
Jason, is there any questions from anybody? And I'll ask assistant clerks on this. I'm having trouble seeing everyone at the same time. Questions from the group.
Question. Jinder has a question.
Yep. Thank you, Ginger. Please, I'll turn it over to you.
Jonathan, I just wanted to ask, in that Ontario Section 21, and I know you tried to include as many industries as possible, but I was just curious, was the Writers Guild involved in that? Because what we'd be concerned about is like sharing of scripts, writing rooms, even though some are virtual, but things like maintaining distances, good ventilation, was all that considered for writers?
The Writers Guild was part of the group.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Questions for the group, Jason, Warren, myself?
I have a question, Alma, here. As part of the policy, I guess just picking up what Jinder was saying, that many productions and some of the precautions that are being on set, as part of what some of the, when it comes to the publicity and promotions of these projects, sometimes we are relying on bringing on like media and others are on set to do, whether it's to do pieces for productions or bank them. So I'm wondering if those are being considered, like how do we invite people or not? How do we make sure that people that are coming on set for those purposes are also following the precautions versus people that are every day on set? Those are being considered as well.
So, and Jason, you can add to this as well, but there's a host of possible scenarios in which visitors, legitimate visitors, could seek access to the workplace. So there are general guidelines touching on that in particular, and employers, producers need to be thinking about the access that they're going to be granted. The general standard, I'd say, is really only essential visitors ought to be allowed in. Everyone should be going through screening, a health screening specific to that workplace before they gain entry, no matter who you are. Obviously, it doesn't matter if you're a worker or a visitor. Everybody needs to be going through that screening, but in order to further mitigate, you need to really be thinking hard about who is allowed on set at any given point in time.
Thank you.
Anyone else for any questions?
I have another question. John, wait a minute.
You're on mute, Ginger. Sorry.
Thank you, Jonathan. The other question I had was this. Let's say, I know that everybody's working very hard to, set these standards and have mandatory processes for production. My question is, let's say if somebody's not adhering, what are the penalties? Have you guys discussed any of that at this Ontario Section 21? Hopefully people will be following, but let's just say they're not.
You want to take that, and I can. Necessary.
Sure. I think the expectation is that people will be, and I think if people are not, that would, be obviously an issue between, the union and the employer and that individual at that time. I suspect, as Maureen said, the guidelines will direct producers to develop their own policies and protocols that they will implement on their show and how they will execute those. And there will be an expectation that technicians and cast and crew will abide by those policies and procedures.
Thank you, Jason.
I'd just like to add that the guidelines, because as Warren pointed out, are recommendations. It's the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires the employer to ensure that people are following the guidelines, any rules with regard to safety in the workplace, and that requirement requires them to ensure that that's happening. And so that would take a number of steps. Like employers would be required to ensure their employees are regularly, using the personal protective equipment, adhering to any rules the employer put in place, and then any deviation of that would require either intervention or potential subjective discipline. And as Jason pointed out, the union would have to be involved in that as well. Questions with regards to the Section 21 guidelines?
Nisha has her.
Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. I think it's great work. And I've read pertinent pieces that relates to our sector. And it promotes, we're one step closer to production resuming. And we couldn't have done it if we didn't have the guidelines. So I'm really, really, thank you.
Work from Jason and everyone. Absolutely.
Jonathan, if I can actually just to add to that, just on behalf of the CMP and on behalf of producers, I want to say this was an incredibly collaborative effort, and the partnership that we enjoyed with the unions and the guilds and all the other stakeholders, it ran very, very smoothly. We debated the issues, and you don't always agree on everything as you're working through things, but it was always incredibly constructive, and we were singularly focused on achieving one goal, and it really was a true exercise in partnership. And it was good to see in this particular environment where everybody is experiencing so much hardship and there is so much difficulty facing the industry, to see that when it really matters, everybody in the industry is really coming together on these very important steps that are required to reopen and to make sure that production is safe and functioning as it should when we all do get back to work. I want to really thank everybody who is involved in that process.
Sorry, it's Jason here. I echo everything Warren has said. It was a monumental task that frankly brought a lot of people together, and we were able to achieve that in, I think, just under 4 weeks. So thank you to everybody involved.
Thank you, gentlemen, and Deshaun, who's not here for the stick handling of that. A lot of work, very much appreciated. All right, thank you for that. No other questions for these gentlemen. I will move on to Mr. Makopoulos, who is the, I think, co-chair of the advisory panel to Minister McLeod, along with Christina Jennings. So, Jim, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Sorry, on which one, Jonathan? Just following the agenda. Are we still? We're on infrastructure and capacity.
We're still under
number 2.
Yes, we're still under the same one, but under FB 5.1, I had notes for section 21 and for the update about the preventive advisory panel. So I would just continue with those two. Do we have to receive the section 21 report?
Would you like to do that? Or receive it under FB 2.5.2? We'll receive it under We'll receive it under number 2 when we receive everything. Yeah. Yes, consolidated. Okay,
perfect. So then I'll move on to Jim's report. And Jim, if you could just give us the update about that advisory panel you've pointed to and are co-chair with Christina and the work that they're doing.
Sure, happy to. Quick background for everyone. The minister set up an advisory panel for this industry back in February, pre-COVID impact in Ontario. And then we pivoted and she specifically asked all of the sectors under her ministry, including tourism and the airlines, of course, for recommendations specific to COVID recovery. So I'll just go over them quickly. What the essence of the submission was. The final submission will be handed in today. Actually, we had a call with minister staff yesterday who had some questions and needed some clarification. We highlighted for the ministry that there are 2 real barriers to the industry recovering properly, and even though these will cost money. And even though we were advised not to recommend things up front that would cost money, we still had to make the province aware of it. Number 1, the additional cost to make TV and film workplaces safe. Like there's a COVID cost to productions resuming. And we wanted to let the province know that this is a cost that it will be very difficult to bear by a lot of production companies. Secondly, production insurance. The CMPA is working on a draft on production insurance that will involve asking the government to participate in a backstop mechanism. So we put those 2 up front, and then and the province specifically asked for what short-term measures can we look at to help you guys get off the ground. And the first category was film and TV tax credits. We asked for them to accelerate tax credit funding milestones for productions. We wanted to ensure that in the short term, COVID mitigation costs are going to be tax credit eligible. We wanted to ensure COVID-19 shuttering costs would be tax credit eligible for domestic productions. And on a film and TV tax credit side, we asked for them to improve the residency criteria. So we wanted to simplify Ontario's residency requirements to include remuneration in the first year of residency, just to bolster our labor force to help us bounce back. Quickly on the capacity side, we again advise them to actively pursue insurance backstop solutions. We asked them to increase Ontario's filming capacity by allowing government-owned buildings that were normally not available to the film industry to become available. We asked the government to work with film commissions all over Ontario to identify tourism, convention, and live event venues. For example, the convention center may not be busy for 6 months. If that could be open for filming, that would be fantastic. To ask municipalities to reduce red tape to allow permit and construction approvals to move quicker. And in supporting labor gaps, especially in the visual effects industry, from July to November, we asked the province to ask the federal government to extend CEWS to November to help VFX handle those gaps. On workforce development, we wanted eligibility requirements to be modified so that online training could be available to film and TV production people. We want to make sure all workforce licenses that may have expired remain valid because government offices have been closed down. And we also asked for something that exists in British Columbia that should be of interest to the Toronto Film Office. We asked the province to amend the Highway Traffic Act to allow for trained traffic signalers as opposed to paid police duty, to make sure that our comeback doesn't strain police capacity. On the Canadian Stories intellectual property side, we wanted the government to specifically mention the importance of this industry to Ontario coming back. And later on the long-term side, we asked for the province to reinstate the province's Ontario IP Development Fund, a fund that was very successful in the past, and maybe even reinstate it at a higher level. On the medium to long-term side, we asked them to reinstate location film shoot fees as tax credit eligible, just like when they shoot in studios. That's a bit of a big ask, but we thought the sky was the limit, so why not? Eliminate content distribution barriers to make Ontario. We asked Ontario to specifically condition eligibility on the content produced, not the means of distribution. And on the workforce development side, in the long term, we asked them to support work from home initiatives and support online training solutions in both English and French. That's the meat of the asks of the government. We may be modifying those a little bit today, given that Quebec is open for business Monday. We will reinstate our ask that Ontario will not be too far behind British Columbia and Quebec for competitive reasons, of course. We will ask for exemptions on travel so that our US-based producers and talent can get in to the country without incident. And we will highlight the fact that Quebec chose to, I believe, put together a $40 million fund to allow production companies to dip into to cover COVID costs. And that, I think, was announced yesterday. And that's certainly one interesting mechanism on how to do it, as opposed to on the tax credit side. That was something we'll bring to the province's attention today. I'm happy to answer any quick questions about the substance of the report.
Any questions for Jim? Questions for Jim? Sorry.
I had my hand up, Jonathan. It's Krista. You might not see.
Please, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing a screen. I apologize. So, Krista, go ahead.
I can tell you, Jonathan.
Jim, I was curious. Thank you very much for putting that together and for the whole working committee working with Minister McLeod. We appreciate it. In terms of the post and visual effects recovery, it will take quite a bit of time. And I was wondering if there's an opportunity to extend that ask from November to January with the sliding of physical production continuing to move it into possibly September as a sort of full bore or being up and running in full capacity. We are seeing that timeline slide in terms of posts and visual effects and are anticipating that dry period as far out as to January 2021.
I'm open to bringing that up with my vice chair, Christina, today. The concern I have about extending it too long is it maybe we could extend it specifically to your industry. I think that could work. I am hearing some reports of technicians, for example, crane operators, delivery people that deliver equipment, choosing to stay home and receive the government benefit as opposed to coming to work, because there's a balance there. And I feel if we extend it too long, we may be doing a disservice to our workforce. So I think there's a balance we need to strike. I can bring it up to our vice chair later today and see her comfort level. But I am hearing reports of people on the logistics side and the equipment delivery side who are just not showing up for work. And now that things are starting to run again and things are moving around on highways, I mean, the highways are busier, but there's a contingent of people that are choosing to stay home as a result of those government payments. So I think we just need to be sensitive to that.
Absolutely. Thank you for revisiting that. And we'd be happy to support any additional documentation or recommendations or representation of our employees and staff that will be unemployed to that extended time frame to support the cause.
Any other questions for Jim? David, I saw your hand up.
Thank you very much. Hey, Jim. Thanks for all the work on the committee. It's fantastic stuff you guys are doing. I wonder if you could just a little bit further unpack the comment you made about residency requirements. I assume it has to do with labor mobility, but could you just explain a little bit further about that?
So that's a tax credit specific item that I would not be able to speak in depth to the level that David Carter could. But I will say that other jurisdictions have residency requirements that are a lot more lax than Ontario. We'd like people that move to Ontario for film and TV to be able to include remuneration in the first year and recognition from the Ontario government in the first year of their residency, and that includes graduates as well that are coming back home if they were going to school elsewhere. So it's really just an effort to bolster our labor force by leveling the playing field with other provinces.
I got Cynthia and Jason.
You could certainly ask David Carter for if you need more of a drill down than that.
Cynthia, then Jason, I see as a speaker list. Cynthia, you're up.
Sorry, it wasn't a question. I was just going to help Jim out there, but he did an excellent job on describing what the ask is. Basically, the ask is to allow for all credits, so this is a particular issue in the visual effects and animation industry, but to make it consistent across all credits so that you're eligible as a resident if you live in the province of Ontario and are liable to pay taxes in the province of Ontario in the year in which the production activity takes place. So like Jim said, this is especially useful when hiring recent graduates who might have come here from out of province to go to school, so wouldn't have the year previous residency, but it just makes it consistent across all credits and makes it more competitive.
Thank you. Jason, you were next.
Actually, it's already been addressed by both Cynthia and Jim. It's just something we hear in a lot of the outreach we're doing with universities and colleges and whatnot for international students and their ability to stay here and work on graduating. So,
perfect. Any other questions for Jim on his report? Jim, thank you very much. We will move on now under the same FB 5.2. The next item would be more infrastructure and capacity building related. I'll start with Nisha Ali, who is the co-chair of the capacity building committee with the province, for just a quick update, and then we'll move on to more city related stuff for permits.
Thank you, Jonathan. I actually think Jim did a fantastic job of reporting on all the 4 committees, and I would be willing to take any questions as it relates to studio capacity. But we first started out. John Weber from Take 5 and I co-chair the building capacity. We started out looking at physical space and the gaps therein, and we soon realized that there are gaps across our sector as it relates to the insurance gap, as it relates to the labor gap. And that's what I think Jim summarized beautifully in terms of the efforts being made there. So I don't want to regurgitate that again unless anyone has any questions. Happy to take.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. So next item under infrastructure capacity building update would be building permit applications for film studio developments. Magali, if you want to quickly weigh in on that.
Thank you, Jonathan. A very brief update. So something that came around the mayor's roundtable and then throughout the consultations that followed suit was the need for the city to actively work with studio owners and developers on if there's building permit or zoning permit application or review applications on their expansions or builds that are either underway and were stopped because of the pandemic or are resuming or starting in the next 6 months, for us to bundle them together to put forward kind of like the film building permit request. It's a handful. Some of you are in this room, some are not. So we've worked with every studio owner developer to list with us what that package should be and where they're at exactly in every permit application. And with Councillor Fletcher, we're putting that to the building permit department to ensure that it's treated expeditedly, given that there might be potential backlog, given that construction had to stop for over a month and a half, and now, of course, has restarted. So we're very keen and on track to be able to, if not fast track, help expedite those so that there's no backlog. I think everybody understands that it's a handful of requests that are through, and that it's totally critical for putting back the industry on track. And I can jump in. Sorry.
No question. Unless there's any questions for Maggie specific on that, I just had a comment as somebody who had an active application in for a company, Stratagem Studios. It was great to see that from the time of application and a generic email from the city saying, it'll take 45 days for us to look at it. They actually looked at it within 24 hours. And we've been in constant communication with them. So I just want to take a moment to say, at least to Scarborough City Planning, who we've been dealing with, been excellent and very attentive. And I appreciate that. Any special favors or anything. It's just very important to acknowledge their hard work.
And the only other update on my part before I move it over to my colleague Bobby is something that everybody was concerned with is whether there would be enough space if the so-called crunch of productions all come back at the same time. So we're working with Business Growth Services, which is a section within EDC, for them to outreach to real estate agents and listers to put certain sites in the radar or on the radar of the film industry. We realize there's a lot of very large sites that could be used either temporarily or in the greatest case scenario for development of studio space in the next few years that come from owners that don't have the film industry on their radar and don't necessarily understand how to go at that. So we will start a quarterly e-blast that will come from the film office and narrow down from the very long listings that the city has from private properties and narrow it down to, let's say, 5 to 10 that should be seen by the industry, and for us to be able to kind of connect the right people together. So all of you would be recipients of that, and then quite a few more. But we think it's something in the right direction. And then that goes from strictly like large pieces of land to unoccupied large buildings, to leases, to sales, to temporary location shoots.
I saw Jeff's hand. I think I saw Jeff's hand go up.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak from a Toronto perspective, John. The same thing. Magali and I have been in contacts throughout one of the companies that's impacted through this process with our build. It's the effort in keeping the project on track has been great. The communication's been great. Even slight changes in our applications is being reviewed rather quickly, so which is nice to see, and we're keeping Magali up to date as well with permits and stuff. And if we run into any issues, it's nice to know that there is a channel there that we can move things along, and that appears to be the case to date. And it's much appreciated to try and keep these projects on track. So thank you for that.
One sec, everyone. Next item I have actually is new locations for temporary film use from Bobby.
Yes, thank you. Sticking on the theme with location opportunities. When the restrictions were put on the film industry, we realized there'd be a backlog of productions, all starting at the same time in the city with limited space. So the film office was trying to open up as many city assets as possible to get ready for the restart. So that's definitely something we've been working on. Just to touch on a couple, city arenas currently are closed and empty facilities. Things like museums, there's going to be a lot of museums not opening up in 2020. and some that won't be opening up at the beginning portion of 2021. So we have empty city buildings and facilities, and the same goes for parking lots to get to put some of the productions off the street and into some city run parking lots. So we connected with all the internal departments that we can connect with, and so far everyone's been working very well together. So we've been able to open up a lot of space internally, and we've also done a little bit of external and private reach out to industries that are suffering now and may suffer when their respective restrictions get lifted, such as the hotel industries and the music venues. We communicated with them to let them know that the film industry is looking for space, and they have space, and they really, really want to do business with the film industry. So far, all the communications that we put out there has been very positive, and we're just mitigating the backlog of production so far, and so far so good.
Questions for Bobby? Oh, David.
Thanks, Bobby. We have been, I'm sure many of us on the call are in a similar situation, but we've been in constant communication with our clients, both here in Canada and abroad. And we are trying to give them, time, real-time updates on where things stand vis-a-vis our capacity as a company to service them and the jurisdictions in which we're operating. That's fantastic information, but I'm just wondering, and I guess obviously there's nothing that's nailed down to the extent that we can be promoting these kinds of things with our clients, or can we? Or is there something that we can speak to or direct our clients, if they haven't already been in touch with you, to contact you to get some idea of what might be available?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I was just speaking with Ontario Creates yesterday, and they have a document that's ready to go out as well, as do we. So this document that I was just touching on some of the highlights, but we do have quite a few opportunities, and it's hard to speak so vaguely just because every production has different needs, and they're different sizes as well. So if we get into a specific conversation about a certain size, we do have space specifically for all types of productions. So there's definitely more to come, but there is information to be had through Ontario Creates and the Film Office.
David, I just want to let you know that like Bobby and the office sends copied that the newsletter that is very much about the Film Office's sort of workings, and that will go out to like producers, location managers, Americans, Canadians. Like this does get blasted in the next few weeks.
Perfect. Any other questions? Don't see any. We shall move on. Next item, actually, for Marguerite, if you could give a quick update on the Basin Street RFP.
Sure, it'll be quick. The Basin Street RFP is delayed, of course. The SIM is ready to go. We are ready to go, but obviously without proponents being able to fly here if they need to in order to see the space, the lot, it doesn't make sense to move forward right now, so it's on hold. It will go out at some point this summer is the anticipation there. So that's what's going on with Basin Street.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there's any questions on that. It seems pretty self-explanatory. All right, moving on. Next would be any upcoming digital infrastructure focus group creation. Marguerite, quick update on that.
Okay, thanks. So a while ago, we reached out to a number of different people in the film industry, Krista, Nisha, amongst others, to talk about digital adaptation and moving workforce home and how that was going and so on. And it gave rise to a number of conversations, some short-term, some longer-term in nature. And so as we get deeper into this process, from urgent response to recovery and rebuild, we're beginning to think more and more about rebuild and building back better. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, and that was discussed initially with that very small group, is what can we do to ensure that the very big pipes, the high-speed VPNs that are available to multiple companies in London, for example, that make it possible for them to take on post-production on large-scale films like Harry Potter and so on, what are we doing to make sure that that kind of capacity exists here in Toronto and that our companies are similarly enabled? And so what we want to do is we want to put together a task force from interested parties in the industry that would help us to accomplish this. We will look to involve Bell, Rogers, SoHoNet, CertNet, and so on. But we do want to start putting that together now. It's a good time to move it forward, and frankly, it aligns with some of the other priorities that we're working on in TOR. And so while it will start off as a central industrial task force, we might be able to widen the lens on that in a way that will increase the power of the advocacy that we can do. So with that in mind, Mr. Co-Chair, I would look to you for some help canvassing the board today to find out who wants to be involved in that task force. And can I just say, Nisha and Krista don't have a choice.
Of course, obviously.
Respectfully.
So I think what would be the easiest way for anyone who would be interested and would want to be considered for that? Where would you like them to send that information? Want me to aggregate that and bring it to you?
They could email me, or they could just use the chat function. I don't know if clerks can record the chat. I know that chat is recordable, but if people could use the chat function, which is the little bubble. But if people don't want to use that, then I would say just email me.
It's not enabled, I'm sorry. The chat function's not here, so best to send an email or put your hand up or get in touch with Marguerite. All standard methods outside of WebEx chat.
And any I get, I will make sure to forward it to you as well.
Thank you, Krista.
Krista,
we know who 2 members are. Krista, yeah. Cynthia, is it your hand up?
I thought, Jonathan. It seems as if March was a very, very long time ago. And because of all that has happened from March to now, I do want to commend Margarita Magali, the city, for all the hard work in helping us to offboard remote our team. I don't think we haven't had a meeting to discuss that. And that effort was, the support was felt immediately from, the early days of March, and in building awareness directly with Bell and Rogers, because that was the most immediate concern across our industry. How do we get everyone up and running? Because we had our client deliverables to make, and their dates was not changing because they needed content on air. And it was really, really helpful and amazing, your support that was felt throughout that time. So I do want to recognize that. And yes, going forward, our landscape is changing and we have to evolve. And the cloud rendering and all that technology, what technology can bring to us, is something that a task force is really, really beneficial and important. So I do support that, and I will be there.
Comments. Thank you, Nisha. Anyone else on that?
Nisha, I echo those sentiments. Marguerite Magali, thank you for hearing us and creating action items that help support our industry. And certainly the news that came out yesterday that there'll be additional fiber laid in rural areas is helpful as we have a workforce that expands, outside of the GTA. So again, thank you.
I think that is all of the items under FB 5.2, unless there's any comments or questions that were held in abeyance. I believe I have to ask for a motion to receive, but I'm not site clerk. They can't slap me, so I'll wait for them to do it.
Yes, you're going to move a motion to receive 5.2. Just before you do that, I just want to say if there's anyone who has any desired locations, and where are you, Victoria? Any locations that you've always desired to have, to be able to shoot, let's just get them on the list now. This is the moment where things could be opened up a bit more. don't necessarily need to hear them, but you can pass them on through Victoria. And anyone else, let's try to increase our locations, city locations. That's it, Jonathan. So we'll just receive it. You're right.
Receive. I believe everyone has given a thumbs up.
Received.
Received. David didn't put a thumbs up. All right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, FB 5.3. So this is specific to workforce development. I'd like to start, there's a few items under this. We'll start first though, because there is a provincial workforce development committee that Cynthia Lynch is chairing. So Cynthia, I'll leave you if you have any comments to add to. I know Jim covered some of it, but same deal. I'll leave you to start.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So there's nothing that much to add. Jim gave sort of what all the recommendations the subcommittee put in. I just wanted to say that this is a fairly large workforce development subcommittee. It does include representation from all of the unions, as well as additional people who are on the Minister Advisory Panel, as well as all the municipality and regional film office people. And on the provincial side, representatives from Ontario Place and the Ministry of Labour. We do have a very important recommendation in the report that some of those Ministry of Labour apprenticeship programs be opened up to our sector. And that has gone in as a recommendation, but we are going to continue to meet with the Ministry of Labour and see if we can make that happen without waiting for the report to make its way all the way through the halls of government. So that work will continue, and there are quite a few people on the film board who are on my subcommittee, so I just want to thank them for all their work on that as well. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you for your hard work on that. And any questions for Cynthia? Workforce development. Any? I will move ahead then. Next would be under the same vein, the Toronto Workforce Study, Magali.
Thank you. Yes. So workforce was really the big theme this year. So all of it is on pause in some way or more certainly. So the Toronto Workforce Study that we presented the scope of work to this board, I believe at the last meeting, and was now very much underway and in fact close to completion with Nordicity, which, just to remind everybody, was the idea of this was to scope, to quantify, to qualify the labor needs for Toronto region for the next 3 years, given the amount of space that was coming online in the next few years and giving the market demand that keeps going up and how much we can absorb. Obviously, nobody's working right now, so it is a very poor time to release something like this and potentially even inaccurate. So we're pushing it to, I would say, hopefully later this year. We'll have to reassess as the months go by, but certainly at a time when the vast majority of the current crew members would be back at work. It's hard to assess growth when people aren't working at capacity, so we'll have to revisit the timeline on that and potentially tweak a bit of the scope and go back for a bit more work in that study.
Questions for Magali with regard to that report? Pretty self-explanatory that it needs to be delayed until we're able to assess it properly. Magali, if you can continue just with the XOTO screen industry sort of pathways update, please.
Sure. I know you could do them too, Jonathan, so I can do them as well.
I'm happy to do it. Sorry. I'd like to lose my headset.
You know, the past year and a half, we launched an amazing program, assistant program with community partners that the DGC generously and gracefully came on board to participate in. Those two programs are set to continue in 2020. We were to launch another stream of training programs with other participants, with other unions. Those were not announced, so they didn't have to be canceled, but we will push them to next year. The commitment from everybody, a lot of you are at this table, was overwhelmingly positive and ready to go. We just need to be ready to go at a later time. So I would say we wanted to kind of double down on what we had done last year this year, but that double down will have to wait next year.
I'll supplement that with the XOTO Schools initiative that we were supposed to have at the beginning of this summer. The money had been committed to it. IA, NABET, a number of the technical unions had stepped up with either money or in-kind services, DGC as well. And so we didn't want to put a pause on that because there was students who were in the pipeline. So we actually, with Jill, who's the project coordinator, we've switched to an entirely online curriculum. She's able to take quite a few more students. So there's a summer school program with the TDSB, and I think there's about 15 students now at least that have signed up, possibly potentially more. The plan is they're going to develop an online curriculum with people from the industry who are currently sitting at home. There's quite a few talented individuals who unfortunately are sitting at home and have been very generous with their time and have already committed to Jill to be able to partake in either online learning sessions or a component of an online learning session. So we think that's great. That'll help continue sort of the interest and buzz around the film industry and stream people into it for when we return. And I think I just want to make a personal comment with regards to that. As you know, workforce development is sort of near and dear to me. It'll be a challenging time when we return. You'll have a number of freelance individuals who won't be returning at the same pace, potentially. It's always hard for them to see non-members of their unions or people who haven't been in the industry out in sort of apprenticeship positions, because that's a paying position that they would also want. I think it'll require some empathy from us to those individuals and potentially some creative thinking, but we shouldn't take the foot off the gas on our workforce development initiatives. I think we should push them ahead because we will have this crunch when we ultimately do return to work. Crunch will still be there with regard to we don't have enough talented, trained individuals in the positions we need, but they're out there. We just have to get them into our program. So I'm really happy the city decided to, with Magley's hard work, to keep this program alive over the summer. The TDSB is very happy about it, and I think it'll just help keep that momentum alive for when we actually are able to return and able to put these people back to work in positions where they're learning and helping and assisting, and then eventually growing into the film industry that will be the post-COVID world. So thank you very much to the city for that commitment. Magley and Marguerite for your hard work on that. Any questions on workforce development? Because that was just it under the 5.3. So none. I think that requires a motion to receive. Those in favor? That's carried. Moving too fast. Clerks can scream at me. All right. Next is FB 5.4. So film office, permitting, locations, industry, and community relations. So Bobby, just a quick update on the film permit process, please.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Just a quick update, just to let the group know about the safety precautions that the film office has implemented during this time. Our application process right now is already online, so there's no change there. But there are some instances when individuals and productions have to come into the office, either to pay for permits or to sign contracts. So we will be going cashless in 2020 and taking all payments via the telephone. And any paperwork that needs to be signed or completed can be done via email. So there's actually no requirement to come into the film office. Not that we don't want to see anybody, just for safety reasons, you don't have to come to City Hall and come into the film office. Everything can be done remotely. I also wanted to touch on some BIA communication and outreach and local businesses that we've spoken to. We reached out to the BIAs last month with a letter explaining that when the film industry returns, the film office's role will be, we want to increase our communication. We want to work together a little bit better in the planning and the prepping for these locations in those neighborhoods. So the theme is communication that we're working with. And we're also going to be encouraging productions to spend locally, donate to the BIA, and participate in the XOTO program. It really amplifies what productions in Toronto are doing to thank communities that film in. So coupled with that, I mean, we're planning to return to an environment that we're really unaware of. So to help plan for that, we're also on the tail end on the wrap portion when productions are wrapping out of a location. The film office will also be involved in sending surveys to both the BIA and the productions to see if there are any issues that we didn't plan for. Are there process changes that need to be done? And basically, how are we doing? And if there's any issues that we didn't plan for, we can pivot and change and fix. right there on the spot. So the feedback so far from the BIAs has been overwhelmingly positive, and everyone's really excited for the film industry's return.
Bobby, thank you for your updates and your hard work. Victoria, I think I saw your hand up for a question.
Thanks, Bobby. We really appreciate everything you're doing. And I know you've been working with John Rackich, our Locations Caucus rep, these initiatives, consulting with him. One thing that I would just like to sort of put on the record is that I think that there's a great opportunity for better cooperation with the BIAs and an opportunity to almost bring them into consultation on how to make filming work better in their neighborhoods. It's like they may be in a unique position to help identify properties and spaces that, you know, really work for the communities and that can actually be offered up as part of going into a certain neighborhood. Here's the parking lot that we want you to use, and there's a special negotiated rate, and make them our partners in making location filming a bit easier on the streets. I think that would be a really worthy thing, and I really applaud your efforts on that front. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, David.
I echo Victoria's comments. That's fantastic. One thing I would like to ensure, and I'm positive it happens, but that the counselors be involved in those conversations, or at least aware of them, so that they know, because the BIAs will first, if there's an issue, they're going to call the counselors. For council to know that we're being proactive and working with the BIAs, I think will go a long way in helping smooth over any potential challenges that we face when we're.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the, not to go into too much detail about the communication that I'm speaking about, but right as soon as an application arrives, the BIA, the production film office will be in a thread talking about it and helping plan for it. So bringing the BIA into the discussion and helping plan is definitely something that we're going to be looking forward to.
I meant specifically the local counselor, making sure.
Sorry, the counselors are usually get the notification right away as well, and they are always going to be a part of the conversation. Absolutely, absolutely.
David, we source a lot of the give backs ideas for neighborhoods through counselors' offices. So for that information to go back to them once they do happen. And on a very positive note, I just want to share with you guys that the XOTO give backs that the film industry has done during the pandemic so far has been amazing. A lot of you were strong participants in all of that, and a lot of other external people too. And just, you know, we did that video. I don't know if you all saw this 2-minute kind of sizzle reel of XOTO give backs from the film industry to the communities to help with PPEs and trailers for isolation rooms and name it. And that short video has been viewed over 100,000 times on various platforms. So that's the kind of gestures that really go an extremely long way to show Torontonians the industry's output into the community. So we really hope that that kind of a visibility of givebacks and community engagement continues through the film office's activities as we go.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other questions under this item? So that would be a motion to receive FB 5.4. All in favor? Is carried. Thank you. Councillor, I apologize. I'm unclear. Would you like to lead FB 5.5 or do you want me to do that?
We could just do that together. Just looking for any updates that people have outside of what we have heard today. Any sharing, roundtable sharing?
Specifically, any for me, just as somebody who sort of tracks that with Marguerite and Magali, any specific items or things you'd like us to track or ongoing for potential report backs? Now would be the time.
Sorry to jump in here again, but I sit on something called the Clean Power Committee in Vancouver. And I just want to bring people up to speed that there is an industry-led initiative that is working collaboratively with the city of Vancouver at this point, and will likely be working with Surrey, North Van, West Van, all the other cities, on the establishment of power drops. Currently, there is a strat plan being commissioned and a heat map being generated, much like we've talked about here. but they've, through City Council in Vancouver, they've taken this on a bit of a more legislative approach and are now actively working to install a network throughout the greater Vancouver area of power drops and kiosks that would have the impact of removing diesel generators from the streets. Fabulous initiative. And, we have talked about that in Toronto. Granted, coming out of COVID, there is going to be such an incredible financial pressure that if we want to go down this road in Toronto, would likely need private sector support of this. But anyway, I just wanted to put that on the table and make sure that people were something this was another jurisdiction.
David, anyone else for any questions or comments or ideas that we should be keeping at the forefront of our mind that haven't been covered here yet? Please. Mute, Jinder.
I also sit on the diversity board for the Writers Guild of Canada, and I have proposed, and we've taken this initiative on, the diversity committee. We're looking, just because of all the situation going on today in the world and with racism, we're looking at why people of color aren't moving up in the writing rooms. And we're also looking at the ratio of how many people are staffed in writing rooms currently when we get back to production. We're going to look at 2019, 2020, and then we're going to go back to 2016 and see where are the gaps and how can we address this gap. Just wanted to share that with you because it's something that it needs to be done.
Absolutely, very important. In fact, that's one of the underlying reasons I really wanted to push ahead with our workforce development stuff, because I think that was having a very great impact on addressing some of the diversity issues we're seeing in film, bringing in new people with diverse opinions and very, very talented people who tend to represent the makeup of our city a lot better than the film industry previously has. So thank you for that comment. Anyone else for? Right, seeing none. Before we receive this item, I want to thank Mike. I know you're on here as well. I haven't seen your handsome face, but Mike Williams, you, Marguerite, Magley, Bobby, the entire team at the film office, Councillor Fletcher, all the other councillors who are on this call. I can't remember who. I'm having trouble seeing it, but right up to the mayor. When we had that shutdown, it hit film hard and fast, as tends to happen with film. It's easy for the money and the work to disappear quickly. It comes back fast, but it leaves fast. And your commitment to trying to address it immediately, convening the roundtable from the mayor, Paula, your personal outreach to everyone, councillors, Marguerite, Magley, the tough work, and everyone who's volunteered for committees or led to chair committees through a very difficult time. Your commitment to this industry is second to none. And it's appreciated very much by me, my team, my company, and my colleagues. So thank you. We have a lot more hard work to come. So thank you for that in advance.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I too want to echo the incredible work by our hardworking staff. They've just stayed on the job. And Marguerite, you're right up there with your ability to talk to Saad Rafi and the recovery team. So we're very proud of you and know that film will be on the front burner, film, television, digital on the front burner. Also just have to say, as always, what an incredible industry this is. So knowledgeable, able to work together, constantly moving things forward, identifying the issues, problem solving. You're just amazing. And I want to thank you all for your big view all the time and how you work together to promote and keep this as an incredibly strong economic part of the City of Toronto and part of the creative industries that we have. I'd just like to, not sure when our next film board is supposed to be. Perhaps, shall we leave the call of that to when we have the report from Saad Rafi and the Recovery Reimagined team? I know that groups of you and 2 large groups will be part of consultation. Marguerite's organizing that to, again, make sure that this industry is considered holistically in any of the plans for recovery and reimagine. And if any industry can help reimagine, this is it. So I would just leave that up. I'm getting something here from the clerk. And that would be, I think I think it's been very helpful to meet to date, although it's difficult. It was great to have the catch up and see how many people are working in critical areas on behalf of the entire industry, and to bring out and up a number of issues still to be dealt with. And David, I want to say that issue with the power drops, we should get on that earlier rather than later, and add that into the recovery effort, because the sidewalks, there's not a lot of people out there at the moment, and this is the time to make change. This is the time to make change, people. So thanks very much for being here today. We have great turnout, only a couple of people missing from the board. And what I'm going to do is just ask if I can have a motion to excuse the absence of the members who were not in attendance today. Councillor Robertson is still recovering, as you know, from her cancer, and there's a number of others who weren't here. Hartley was not here, and Caitlin was not here. So if I could have a motion, please, to excuse those folks. Who wants to move that? I see Warren's moving that. Thank you very much. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And that would be it. I would say that this concludes our business for today, and thank everybody for participating, and adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for carrying so much of the meeting. Thank you to the film board staff. Thank you to everybody who's going to just carry on such fantastic work for this industry in this city. See y'all later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Alistair, keep that beard.